Input variables, what they are, how they works, arguments they accept, and different ways to pass variable values. That's all we're going to learn in this two-part video series. Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm Gurlal. In this part one, we're going to learn what input variables are, how you define them in your configurations, and some of the arguments like description, default, and variable types. We'll also learn why these types are important and how they play a role in your configuration. I will also demonstrate as we learn the concepts. I feel like if we do demo at the end, it kind of gets somewhat overwhelming from learner's point of view. You kind of put everything in one place. It may not be good from learning point of view. So I'll demo as we go. Without any further delay, let's get started with part one. So input variables in Terraform allow you to pass in values at Terraform runtime, and they help you customize your configuration without changing the code itself. They also make your infrastructure more flexible and reusable. These are critical for enabling modular and adaptable Terraform code, which allow you to deploy similar infrastructures across different environments. To define an input variable in Terraform, we use the variable block followed by the variable name. Name for the variable must be unique among all variables in the same modules. In this example, we are defining a variable named instance type, and to reference this variable within our configuration, we use this syntax var dot followed by the variable name. In this example, EC2 instances in our configuration are referencing instance type variable to define its value. We would declare the value whenever we run the Terraform code. So let's see that in action. How do we define a variable and how the resources reference those variable values? For this example, we do have a variable defined. We have three EC2 instances that we are creating. All of the EC2 instances going to refer the variable for their instance type. As you could see, the variable defined using variable block followed by the name, and when the resources are referencing that variable, they're using the syntax var dot instance type, which is the variable name. So let's run this Terraform code. So when we run our Terraform code, we would be prompted to enter in the value for our variable. In our case, it's a value for instance type. So let's enter in the value for instance type. So once I define the value, that's what the value would be for our resources. As you could see it, instance type has t2 micro value, and that is the same for other EC2 instances as well. So yeah, that's how you reference and declare your variable. And this is just a simple example. We'll be exploring more options on how you declare additional arguments for your variable blocks. All the arguments for variable blocks are optional, but they are highly recommended. We use arguments to control variables behavior. First, we have description. This would explain what the variable is being used for. Then you have default. With the default, you specify a predefined value for your input variable. This value is used if you don't explicitly provide a value for this variable when you run your Terraform code. It also makes providing a value for your variable optional. This is how it kind of looks like a variable with a description and default value defined. You have a variable, again, the instance type. We define the description, what that variable is for, and then we have a default value, which is t2 micro. Let's see in action, how does it look like when you give a description for your instance type and declare a default value. So here we have the same variable that we were using previously, and this time I've defined a description argument telling what this variable is for, and then I've declared a default value. This time we have two EC2 instances. They are still referencing the type from this variable. Let's see how Terraform behaves after providing these two arguments. As soon as I run Terraform plan, I won't be prompted for a value this time. As I was saying before, when you define default value, declaring a value for your variable becomes optional. There are ways to override it, and that's something we will look into it in the later part of the video when we learn how to pass variables. With the default value, you would notice that all of my EC2 instances are picking up the value that I've defined as a default value. I would change that value to, let's say, T3 micro. There's no type like that, but for demonstration purposes, I've defined that value. And if I run Terraform plan now, you would notice that my instances have that type, and I was not get prompted to enter in the value for it. Next, we have a type argument. Type defines the format and the structure of the data that the variable expects. Terraform does not validate the values until it creates it. So specifying the variable type is just kind of like one of the safeguards to ensure that we define the correct value, which would prevent errors. You may have noticed in the previous demo where I've changed the default value to T3 micro, and Terraform didn't do anything about it. Terraform, like I said, does not validate the values until it's trying to create the resources. Now let's explore each variable types. First, we have string. When you define the type as a string, Terraform would only accept string as the variable value. To declare a string type, this is how you do it. You define the variable block and then you use the type argument and then specify string. To pass a value for a string type, you just put the value in quotes, and on the left side, you define the variable name. Another type is numeric type, which is again number type. To declare a number, you just type the keyword number. To pass a value, this time you just provide the number that you wanted for your variable. Then you have a boolean. To declare a boolean, you just use the keyword bool. The boolean value could be either true or false. To pass a value, you just either input a value true or false. For this demo, we have a string type variable defined, which is named instance type. And then we have a number type variable, which is essentially accepting a value for instance count. And then you have a Boolean variable, which is accepting true or false value if we want to create the bucket or not. And that's how the resources are referencing those variables are. For EC2 instance, we are confirming the count, how many resources we want to create from the variable value. And instance type is also getting determined from the variable value. And then you have S3 bucket, another resource we are creating in this example. And the count of the bucket would be determined on the value for create bucket variable if we enter true or false. So let's try to create these resources, or at least do Terraform plan. So when we do Terraform plan, I'm gonna ask to be entering the value for all three variables. The first is a Boolean one, create bucket. So I could either enter true or false. And then I'm expected to enter instance count, which only accept number. So I'm entering number value, and then there is a instance type. All of those values been passed to our resources, and S3 bucket would be created because we defined the count that we said that we wanted to create the resource, and then the instance type and the number of resources that it would create are defined using the variables. So let's see if I try to define the value type incorrectly and see what happens. So this variable expect either true or false. So let's say I enter like any random word top, and for the instance count which expect numbers, I'm gonna enter test, and for instance type we would type it correctly. I'm getting error message saying that I should enter in a number for instance count, unsuitable value for this variable. And then again, we're seeing the same behavior for Boolean variable where the Boolean value is expected where I provided the wrong value. So again, as I said before, the types helps you catch certain errors early on. So you just make sure that people enter the values that the resource type arguments are expecting. The count value can only be number. You can't do Boolean for count. So defining variables types helps you catch those kind of errors early on if someone tries to enter incorrect data type. So far, we looked at the single values that we defined for a particular variables type. What if my variable is gonna have multiple values? Then we have different types of variables that we could use. The first one we have list. List is a group of multiple values together. List could be a list of strings or numbers, but you can mix them. So this is how you declare them. When you're declaring list, you use the keyword list, and within the brackets, you define the data types, either going to be string, number, or Boolean. How do you pass a value to a list? So you just use the variable name and you enclose the values in square brackets, and values are separated using comma. Next, we have map. Map is a collection of key value pairs. Just like list, values of map can be either string, number, or Boolean. You can mix them. To declare a map type, you use the keyword map, and within the bracket, you define the value is going to be either string, number, or Boolean. To pass a value to your map type, use the variable name as you see it here, and then you use curly braces and then define the key and then key's value. Depends on the type you use, the syntactic would vary. For strings, you would use double quotes and for numbers, you would just define the numbers, and Boolean, it would be either true or false. Now we have a bit of a complex data type, object. Object is a collection of key value pairs. In objects, each key would have a name and the data type that particular key would expect. To declare an object, you would use the keyword object within the brackets. Then you have a collection of key names and the data types they accept. So here we have an object and we have an instance type key name and the type of the value it would accept, and then you have a volume which would accept number, and then you have another key name enable public IP which would accept Boolean type. To pass a value for something like, you would have a variable name on the left, and within the curly braces you would define each key name and with the colons and then define their values. Here we have an instance type separated by colon, and then we are passing the value for that key. Then similarly, we're doing for the volume and then enable IP, public IP. You could also reference a particular key as well. To do that, you just do var dot variable name dot the key name. And that's what we are doing here. We're calling the instance type from EC2 setting object type. Now let's demo these three types that we just learned. Here we have where we're using three types and we define the variable using three types, and then we are creating EC2 instance that gonna reference all of the variables. First, we have a security groups variable that gonna accept list of strings as its value for the security groups. And then you have a common tag. It's gonna accept map values. Then you have EC2 instance variable, which is an object type. We define the key names and the type of data that they would accept. Then we are creating the resource. For the security group, we're just calling it the entire list by defining the variable name. Then same for tags, we're calling the entire variable introducing var.common tag for instance type, which is within the object type. So we're calling the key name of EC2 settings object. Similarly, for public IP address and volume size as well, where we are calling the volume key of EC2 settings object. So let's see how we pass the values for this when we run Terraform plan. For common tags, as I said before, you have to use curly braces. And since we are passing in the strings, that's the value types I'm gonna define. If you're passing in multiple values, you could separate them using comma, especially when Terraform prompting you for those values. We will be again exploring better ways to define these values, but for now, just remember that if you're using Terraform prompt option, you could separate map or string values using comma. Now we are defining EC2 settings object. You may notice that we aren't getting prompted for each key name in when Terraform prompts happen. So we'd have to define the key names along with the values when we passing it. Okay, so we define our map object. As I said before, we'd have to define the key names along with the values. The order doesn't really matter as long as you define the correct key names. As you could see it in here, the volume is on the second. Here we declare the volume at last. Whenever we are defining value or passing the value for lists, we put them in the square brackets. Before I hit enter, I just want to make you aware that if I enter in incorrect data types for key names, I would get an error just like what we saw when we were looking at the previous data types. So the data types are also important along with the key names, and that goes same for list and map. So if I try to enter in numbers, they would get converted to string, or the boolean would get converted to string. But if it's a number, it can be converted to string. So just keep in mind, whatever the data types you've defined, that's how you passed in the values. Let's create this one now. So all of the values been passed. As you could see, volume size is coming from my object, and the tags are coming from another variable I was using, common tags, and the types would be coming from again my object types. So yeah, so each would have their own reasoning whenever you want to use it. In here, you notice that I've tried to combine the settings for my EC2 in one variables. You would have a lot of scenarios in real world where you want to combine the sum of the settings for each resource at one place. And similarly for the tags, I've defined the tags. I could apply this variable to all of the resources that I'm creating. And for the list, whatever the arguments of resources that accept lists, that's when you use list variable. In our case, security group argument of AWS instance resource expect you to provide a list, so that's why we use list variable.